So far, I've made 2 videos about the adaptation of The Last of Us. The first one was about how the game could be adapted into a TV series format, while the second was a commentary on the flaws that I saw in the adaptation after it finished. And yet, even with those 2 videos, I still clearly haven't gotten my fill, because here we are again, for the 3rd time, critiquing HBO's The Last of Us. So why do I keep returning to this topic? First and foremost, the 2nd season is just around the corner and I intend to cover it on the channel, so a refresher on the 1st season was required. Second point, despite critiquing the show harshly in my previous video, I do still think that it's the best video game adaptation that there is, even accounting for Arcane, which is an absurd point of comparison because that show is clearly doing something very different than The Last of Us. Both are adaptations, of course, but one is adapting nonsense lore into a compelling narrative, while the other is taking a masterpiece of interactive storytelling and reducing it to a non-interactive medium. But even with that said, I still maintain that the show, despite it being the best video game adaptation, still has many problems, especially when we're comparing it to the world-building, characters and themes of the original narrative. The adaptation is unabashedly doing its own thing. The showrunners Druckmann and Mason saw a cast of characters that didn't get much screen time in the game and decided to expand on them. I mean, those hours of gameplay have to be replaced somehow, right? I don't need a one-to-one recreation into another medium, but then again, if you're adapting The Last of Us specifically, there should be some follow-through with the themes and important scenes in the game. Ultimately, it is these expansions on the source material that dilute the adaptation into being less than its inspiration. And to be clear here, it's not bad like Uncharted or Borderlands are bad, but simply less than the original. So let's explore why that is. A discussion about the adaptation will invariably have to also explain what made the original so great. In fact, when I made that original video, there were many commenters asking me to critique the game, which I deliberately avoided throughout that first video. The reason for that is actually very simple. The Last of Us has already been analyzed to death, and there's no point in reinstating what everyone else has already said. I'm pretty sure that since you're already here watching this video essay, you have probably consumed some other video essays about The Last of Us. If you already know what The Last of Us is about, why would I have to reinstate that in the first place? That being said, what I didn't expect with the response to that original video was how many people had come to very different conclusions about what The Last of Us is actually about. To some, The Last of Us isn't just about Joel and Ellie's journey together, but about the wider world as a whole, now steeped in constant conflict and danger due to the outbreak of the cordyceps. My favorite comments in this line said the following: "Luke, the name of the show is The Last of Us, not a humongous fungus among us or how Joel got his daddy groove back with Ellie. The us referring to humanity, not just the 2 of them. The game had a limited scope in which to tell the story because we were playing as Joel or Ellie, so we had to experience these things as them and with fighting and stuff in order to be an interesting game." While I find this comment really funny, I disagree with the reading vehemently. Since this seemed to be a common reading in the comments, I'll take some time to explain what makes The Last of Us special, at least for me. There's no denying that the world of The Last of Us is a major part of its success. There are numerous points where the development team relies solely on environmental storytelling, the best example probably being the sewer section which tells the story of Ish. Similar points include the Boston quarantine zone, the Pittsburgh section, and David's camp. These are excellent parts of the game, but there's no denying that this story has always been about Joel and Ellie at the forefront. Every single scene, with the exception of the beginning with Sarah, centers around the point of view of either Joel or Ellie. This isn't a gameplay limitation, it's a deliberate choice from the developers to center the story around these 2 characters. The world of The Last of Us is an awful place, which is why we experience these things solely from the perspectives of a man shaped by this very world and a naive child. Those contrasting worldviews are what this narrative is all about.
See if you can get it propped open with some.
There's some pretty gnarly stuff in here.
Ellie!
Right.
Fucking hunters. See, this could have been us.
Man, that is a lot of people that didn't make it.
I knew I should have turned the damn truck around.
We lived.
Barely. Come on, let's get out of here.
The drama of the game is following how these events affect and change Joel and Ellie. That is the central plot of The Last of Us, the beating heart of the narrative that differentiates it from other works of zombie fiction. The core concept of the narrative is to ask the question, what would a parent do for their child? Joel in turn is a protagonist perfectly suited to answer this question, as he has already failed that mission once. The central plot of The Last of Us is about Joel and Ellie finding the trust between each other, and for that to happen, Joel will have to accept the duty of being a father again. All throughout the narrative, he carries this facade of being indifferent to the world around him. It makes sense, he has steeled himself against every single tragedy that could potentially touch him. When faced with more tragedy, as in the death of Tess or the deaths of Henry and Sam, he reacts accordingly.
About Tess, I don't even know what
Here's how this thing's gonna play out. You don't bring up Tess. Ever.
I forgot to leave that stupid robot on his grave. What should I do with it?
Ellie,
What? I want to talk about it.
no.
Why not?
How many times do we need to go over this? Things happen, and we move on.
This defense mechanism that he has created around himself is the reason that he isn't willing to accept Ellie as a surrogate daughter. If he were to do that, he would place himself at the risk of having to experience the death of a daughter again. Therefore, his want is to deliver Ellie to the Fireflies, but his need is to confront his failure to save Sarah and eventually accept Ellie in her stead. The character of Bill then is a sort of idealized version of Joel's facade. Bill has secured an entire town which he protects all by himself. Anyone who approaches, even if they're a friend, gets treated with the utmost scrutiny. Bill, unlike Joel, has given up everyone else to secure his own survival, to the point that he doesn't even consider why he wants to keep surviving cut off from everyone else. Ultimately, it is a completely hollow existence, as his life has ceased to have any other meaning than survival. He is the perfected version of the facade that Joel carries. As Joel and Ellie leave his town, he remarks,
"You ain't gonna make it."
which is a foreboding statement to say the least. To become an idealized version of a survivor, Joel will have to give up everyone else that he cares about and become like Bill. The subplot of Henry and Sam too serves a similar function in the narrative to display a potential ending to the journey that Joel and Ellie go on. Bill's ideology wins here. If you care about someone, you can't go on without them, as is the case with Henry after Sam dies. To Joel, it is a grim reminder of what will happen if he continues his task of delivering Ellie. In accordance with the scene, it is questioned in the next chapter as Joel tries to hand off Ellie to Tommy instead, now cautioning himself against experiencing the death of a daughter again. To the audience, it serves as a reminder that this world isn't above offing children, and that Ellie will most likely face a similar fate in the narrative, which will be explored more during the winter section and the ending of the entire narrative. Tommy's dam is the midpoint of the narrative where Joel's facade of a toughened survivor gets tested. Joel tries to get Tommy to continue the journey, which he refuses, angering Joel. This is a wonderful scene, as it is clear that Joel has become attached to Ellie, although he doesn't want to admit it. He's scared that he will end up losing another daughter if he continues, albeit he hides these emotions. Quoting Ted Talley, the screenwriter of Silence of the Lambs, what's important is not the emotion that they're playing, but the emotion that they're trying to conceal. Ellie then calls him out for trying to give her to Tommy and bailing on the mission. She even calls back to Joel's ghost, which elicits the same coping mechanisms that he has used thus far, only to regain a sense of fatherhood as the three ride back to Jackson. From this point on, the facade that Joel carries starts to fade gradually as he starts to become more fatherly to Ellie. Their bond is then almost immediately tested when Joel is mortally wounded and Ellie has to take care of him. Here, the narrative switches to Ellie's perspective. As we learned earlier, her greatest fear is that she will be left alone. In that sense, losing Joel at this point would be the worst thing that could happen to her. Her want is to reach the Fireflies and produce a cure to heal her survivor's guilt, but her need is not to be abandoned. Both of these are in jeopardy at this moment. Skipping over to the encounter with David, ultimately it is Ellie that breaks out completely on her own. Joel does arrive at the scene, but by that point it is already too late. Ellie has already killed David by herself, losing the naivety and innocence that she had earlier. This is in many ways the turning point, the culmination of their relationship. This is where the bond between them fully forms. This fully realized bond is then again tested as Joel suggests that they don't need to complete this mission.
We don't have to do this. You know that, right?
What's the other option?
Go back to Tommy's. Just be done with this whole damn thing.
His need of healing from the wounds of Sarah's death has now completely overtaken his want of delivering Ellie to the Fireflies. Ellie's motivation, however, has not yet been completed as she suffers from survivor's guilt because of the people that they've lost on the way to this point. Ellie needs this journey to mean something, for the hardships to amount to something greater.
After all we've been through. everything that I've done. It can't be for nothing.
So the Fireflies capture the two, and Ellie is immediately trolley-problemed after surgery. Joel, who indeed has now come to the full understanding that his desire of wanting a daughter again outweighs the potential survival of the rest of the planet, makes the choice not to go through with the loss again. It really doesn't matter whether you think Joel is in the right or wrong morally here. The only thing that matters is that you empathize with the choice because you've seen what he has gone through to restore his former self. The character arc only works because we understand why Joel makes this choice. Albeit, in my personal opinion, this story is simply better if this choice is between an actual cure for mankind versus Joel's desire to heal his own wounds. If the cure isn't possible in the first place, then this choice doesn't have any real meaning. So whichever way you play, Joel either kills a bunch of Fireflies here or just Jerry the doctor operating on Ellie. The second game will actually retcon this, showing that Joel killed a lot of Fireflies, but that's a topic for another video that we'll get to later. The game here makes you dip your hands in blood. There is no such thing as a pacifist run of The Last of Us, which again is a deliberate choice from the developers. So getting to the final scene, Joel's need of healing his wounds and getting a new daughter have been fulfilled. Ellie's arc, however, finishes without her getting what she wants or needs. As she is pulled out of the hospital without explanation, she doesn't understand if the journey actually amounted to anything. In fact, Joel's claim that there are others like her undercuts the entire journey that they just went on. Her want, therefore, is completely unfulfilled. Worse yet, in my reading, Ellie doubts that Joel is telling the truth about the events that transpired in the Firefly hospital, meaning that even though Ellie has technically got what she needs, she isn't alone anymore after all, the person she is with is totally untrustworthy. And it is these plot threads that will be again picked up in the sequel. So that's about as short of an analysis I can provide. It's not a complicated story. As Druckmann himself notes, the writing philosophy behind the project was simple story, complex characters. It comes in, it does its thing, and leaves with an open ending enticing the audience to ponder Joel's morality and whether Ellie knows what truly happened in the hospital. So now let's get to the adaptation and see how it differs. If I were to put into the least amount of words the problem I have with the adaptation, then it would be the following. The show assumes that we care about these characters. As I've already explained, the central plot of the original The Last of Us is about the bond between Joel and Ellie, with the subplots building up their relationship thematically. The adaptation in turn seems to assume that we care about Joel and Ellie from the get-go, and that the show doesn't have to do the work that the original narrative did. The expanded side characters, while interesting on their own, only serve to distract the audience from Joel and Ellie's story. And this is all but confirmed by Mazin and Druckmann on the official The Last of Us podcast, in which they explain that the core theme of the show is toxic love and what people will do to protect their loved ones.
We will continue to come back to the notion that love conquers all, and that's problematic. That we think of love as this solely positive thing. Love is not always good. And when we talk about this show and as we go episode by episode, we're going to meet people that love each other over and over and over, and we're going to see this dynamic play out over and over and over.
It isn't just about Joel's love for Ellie and vice versa, but about how every single character in this narrative is only trying to protect someone they love. Therefore, this version of the narrative is truly about the world of The Last of Us instead of just about Joel and Ellie. But as I mentioned in the beginning, if you're adapting The Last of Us specifically, I'm expecting follow-through on the themes of the game. So let's dive deeper into what we get instead. Here are the general beats for the shared arc of Joel and Ellie in the adaptation. Episodes 1 to 3 serve as the setup for the bond. They're adjusting to their newfound relationship as smuggler and cargo. They're constantly butting heads as Ellie is very assertive and Joel is, well, grumpy. In episode 1 they meet, in episode 2 Tess is the glue between them, and in episode 3 they serve as the frame narrative for Bill and Frank's story. It is clear from these episodes that Joel is having severe doubts about Ellie's immunity, as well as about if he wants to go through the journey in the first place. Something drastic will have to happen for them to start opening up to each other. Episodes 4 to 6 then are all about building that bond set up in episodes 1 to 3, starting with Ellie saving Joel from a certain death at the hands of a raider. This forces Joel, just like in the game, to open up more as he realizes that he cannot complete the journey alone. Ellie then opens up about her experiences with violence in the past, explaining that she actually has already killed someone. The two further bond over jokes that Ellie tells, and by episode 5 their trust has seemingly fully fully formed, as Ellie can already joke about how grumpy Joel is to Henry and Sam. The established bond is further confirmed as Joel directly asks Ellie if she trusts him in episode 5, to which she replies that she does. The problem here is that I haven't bought into their bond at all yet. The show is already playing on these character beats like they've been doing this for a long time, whereas for the audience they were butting heads just a few episodes ago. It is honestly like the relationship between them formed off screen. In the game, it's so easy to grow accustomed to these two characters speaking to one another as you're playing. The bond between them grows through osmosis. Joel is teaching Ellie about how the world works and what people will do to survive. Here's an example. In the game, Ellie's reliance on Joel is confirmed as she jumps down with Joel after Henry and Sam ditch them while running away from the truck. She essentially picks being with Joel over her own survival here. A meaningful moment that shows that Ellie truly cares about Joel. The closest we get to a moment like this in the adaptation is the sniper scene in episode 5, but that doesn't have nearly the same emotional impact as what I just described there. So yeah, 5 episodes in, the audience just has to believe that they now care about each other. None of this is stated out loud, which is a good thing as it gives the audience something to chew over, but then again, there really isn't enough for me to buy that the two care about each other at this point in the narrative. Episode 6 then is the midpoint of the narrative in which Joel will finally fully accept the role of the caretaker, although he will reject the mission entirely first due to the death of Henry and Sam. This episode is all about the bond between Joel and Ellie, and I really enjoy the scenes of them discussing space and sheep farms, as those two elements are clear setups for the sequel as well. Just good organic writing fleshing out the characters. We get into problems, however, as the episode starts stress testing their bond that was supposed to be built in the prior episodes. Ellie gets defensive as Maria criticizes Joel. Joel in turn voices to Tommy that he cannot complete the mission, which Ellie overhears. Once again, it's a conflict that is built upon a faulty premise, because I fundamentally do not believe that these two care about each other with the screen time that they've gotten. Because episodes 4 and 5 are more concerned with Kathleen, Henry, and Sam, this conflict in episode 6 feels hollow. What creates more issues is how this version of Joel states his reasoning out loud as to why he doesn't want to complete the mission. He's tired, he's old, and he just doesn't want to go through this again. The nuanced dialogue between him and Tommy in the original narrative is reduced to a scene where Joel simply states, "I can't do this." Even though I'll be the first to admit that Pedro Pascal delivers this scene flawlessly, the character building is fundamentally less interesting than what the original did. Eventually, after remembering Sarah, Joel takes on the mission, and we get some of the best scenes in the adaptation of Joel and Ellie bonding, now committed to each other. It's something that I wish the adaptation did earlier. In fact, if you took these scenes and put them in like episode 4 or episode 5, I would buy into the relationship much more. As Mason states in the podcast, this is as good as it's ever going to be between the two, which is a shame because these sorts of moments will not occur again in the adaptation. By this point, the audience will have to be fully bought into the relationship, as the next episodes will be either spent with them totally apart, or with their relationship taking on a darker context. Simply put, if you do not believe in these two caring about each other at this point, the drama of the following episodes is going to fall completely flat. The context of the next episodes, those being 7, 8, and 9, is built upon the bond between the two, whether that be Ellie trying to heal Joel, Joel going to save Ellie from David, or Joel killing the Fireflies. Not to beat a dead horse here, but since this relationship isn't built properly throughout those first 5 episodes, the second half of the season is fundamentally broken. Now, as a reminder, if you accept the show on its own premise, that this narrative is about toxic love and how it is represented in all these characters throughout the world of The Last of Us, then it's a perfectly okay show. There's nothing wrong with that. But that isn't the thing that I tune in for when I watch The Last of Us. In fact, if I do not believe in this bond in the first season, I have no clue how they will adapt the second game, because that entire narrative is built upon how Ellie feels about Joel. But we'll dive deeper into that in the next video. But unfortunately, I think the problems go a bit deeper with the adaptation. So let's discuss Ellie. A lot of hubbub has been made about casting Bella Ramsey as Ellie, ranging from people saying that she doesn't look like game Ellie to others critiquing her performance. Honestly, both of these arguments are a bit puzzling to me. The first camp loves to cite an article which claims that Kaylee Spaney was in the running for the role, although if you actually check the sources on said article, Kaylee Spaney isn't mentioned even once. Total misinformation that these people spread gleefully. It should be noted that casting isn't, and well, has never been, about finding a perfect lookalike. like. While it is a bonus, it isn't a prerequisite. Ashton Kutcher looked more like Steve Jobs than Michael Fassbender did, but in the end, it was Fassbender who gave the better performance of that character. Acting is always about who can embody the character that they're portraying, not about looking exactly like them. Could Kaylee Spaney have done that? Maybe. We'll never know. But to rely on that as a point of criticism is just flawed logic. Which brings us to the second point, that Bella Ramsey doesn't do a good job of portraying Ellie. On this point, I'm a bit more ambivalent. On the one hand, I think she does an excellent job at portraying Ellie from episodes 6 to 9, but on the other, I just do not vibe with the choices in earlier episodes. In the podcast, Druckmann and Mason mentioned that Ellie does feel guilt over the death of Tess at the beginning of episode 3, but she hides it.
Look, I'll do all those things, but let's be clear, I am not responsible for Tess's death, which to me, I can't help but look at like Bella and Ellie and say, oh, you totally feel guilty. You're saying these things, but you're feeling the opposite. You're like, it's coming from an insecure place, which is ultimately, again, there's more to be revealed with that with Ellie.
I'm a big believer that people are liars. It's just part of it's part of human nature, is that we lie. Hopefully when we're lying, we're doing it to make things go a little easier for ourselves and others and not hurt people's feelings and all the rest. But sometimes we're lying because we simply can't handle the truth. And what's interesting is, here's Ellie saying, it wasn't my fault, but of course she feels like it's her fault.
I haven't noticed this a single time that I watched the show, and I've watched it like 5 times at this point. In fact, as I was listening to this podcast for the first time in preparation for this essay, I couldn't even imagine that this was the intention of that scene. To me, it has always been just a continuation of Ellie's character from the first 2 episodes. She's fiercely independent and calls Joel out on his bullshit.
Nobody made you or Tess take me. Nobody made you go along with this plan. You needed a truck battery or whatever, and you made a choice. So don't blame me for something that isn't my fault.
If there's supposed to be guilt happening here as well, I do not see it in the slightest. So, a mixed bag overall. But ultimately, if we're talking about the flaws of this character, there are far bigger problems than Bella Ramsey's portrayal of Ellie. The true problems with this character are in the writing. Let's take a step back to those first 3 episodes. Ellie is brash and snarky, just like her game counterpart. She doesn't take an ounce of shit from anyone, and it's fairly entertaining to watch. But the original Ellie wasn't just about being snarky. She also had a layer of innocence which came out when she and Joel went through the post-apocalyptic landscape.
I'm whistling.
Oh, good. Something else you can drive me crazy with.
That's awesome. Everywhere.
I saw this right before the outbreak.
He did? Does he totally gut her by the end?
Nobody gets gutted. It's a dumb teen movie.
Teamwork. Really? Just gonna leave me hanging? All right. I'll see how it is.
In the show, these parts are replaced with smaller moments, like Ellie asking Joel what it was like to be on an airplane in the beginning of episode 3, or with her telling jokes throughout the show. The 7th episode does a lot of heavy lifting towards building the character into this direction, but it comes far too late into the narrative. The bond between Joel and Ellie, after all, is supposed to be built in episodes before that. So ultimately, the dynamic between the two changes from the game's cynical old man and a naive child to the show's cynical old man and a snarky child. A dynamic which is fundamentally less interesting than what was in the game. What stands above all the other changes, however, is the bizarre choice to make her interested in violence. She watches Joel beat the Fedra soldier to death in the first episode, mesmerized. She constantly asks for a gun. She cuts open an infected that is pinned beneath the rubble to examine the wound, etc, etc. It just doesn't feel as innocent or naive about the world as the original version of the character. And I get it, it's an expansion on the character. She lives in a violent world, which is why she is interested in someone who can wield that violence to their own advantage, that being Joel. She wants to also be able to survive in a harsh world, which is why she wants a gun. In fact, Mason elaborates on the podcast that she wants a gun because she wasn't able to save Riley without it, as we'll see in episode 7, a neat detail that I missed. But then again, the show doesn't really point it out either. And she is infected herself, so it's no wonder that she is interested in examining the pinned down infected, as she will never get a chance like this again. For all I know, these choices might be paving the way for Ellie's character in part 2, which I will not spoil spoil here. There are certainly many things that seem to set up the sequel, like Ellie listening to 80s music and the sheep farm talk. But these scenes accumulate and paint a picture of a character that would be more fitting as a villain instead of what Ellie is supposed to represent in the story. If I'm being honest, if you gave me the first 3 episodes and told me to write the rest of the show, I would write her into a villain, a character that has been power hungry from a young age. The dramatic irony of the only cure for humanity being someone who lusts after power would be irresistible based on those first 3 episodes. The reason I even bring this up is because what we know from her character needs to lead up to her meeting with David. That's where the original narrative forces Ellie to take on extreme violence to survive, contradicting that innocence about the world that she had leading up to that point. The adaptation in turn does things a bit differently. So, from episodes 1 to 3, Ellie is asking for a gun. At Bill's place she finally gets one, taking it without Joel seeing. In episode 4 she shoots a guy in the back and obviously feels bad about it. She got what she wanted, but only now realizes what it takes to cause violence. She veers from this violence until episode 8, in which she is forced into a confrontation with David. So her character progression in this sense goes from wanting to cause violence to learning that she doesn't want to cause violence to someone forcing her to cause violence. It's not a bad character arc when you're looking at it from the outside in. However, if I'm to compare the game's innocence to loss of innocence, to the adaptation's want for violence to understanding said violence, the game's character progression is just far more compelling. It feels more resonant with the narrative. While the world is harsh and cruel, it doesn't mean that you have to become like that. And while we're on the topic of the world, let's talk about that. Now, I've been talking about the world of The Last of Us throughout this essay and how it affects the central plot of the original, but not how much it affects the adaptation. As I have maintained, the showrunners made a conscious choice to focus more on the world in this adaptation, but let's take tally on how that affects the vibe of the story. The original game presents an extremely harsh world where there are no safe zones. The Boston quarantine zone, while maintained, is filled to the brim with violent Fedra soldiers and even more violent criminals. Bill's town isn't a utopia impenetrable from the infected. In fact, Frank dies escaping from it. Bill spends his days weeding out the infected so that they don't overwhelm him in the future. Pittsburgh is run by a large group of raiders who prey upon travelers who enter the city. Tommy's Dam, while relatively safe, is attacked by a group of raiders. Jackson might be totally safe, as we'll see in the sequel, but we do not see that in the original game. And that's not even taking into account the sheer amount of infected that roam around the world. Now, I could go on, but the point should be fairly apparent from these examples. Everywhere Joel and Ellie go, there's bound to be danger. Some might say that this is due to the player needing something to shoot at, but then again, this is the world that is presented to the player. The adaptation's depiction of the world is very different in this regard. The streets of Boston are quite frankly bustling with people living their lives. There's work, there's rationing, and things are okay. Not great, mind you, I get it, you're burning corpses, there are public executions, there's a Firefly bombing, but overall, it's not that bad in comparison. The infected are heavily present in episode 2 and make a brief comeback at the end of episode 5, but after that they're not really that big of an issue. Bill's town is relatively safe as the infected won't get through the traps, and there's only one serious attack by raiders. Bill and Frank aren't in danger most of the time, to the point that they have to do cardio to stay healthy. Ultimately, Bill and Frank win the survival game as they get to go out on their own terms. They change Tommy's Dam into Jackson, which is by all accounts a complete safe haven shielded by massive walls. There's even an elderly couple living on the outskirts who don't feel at all threatened as Joel and Ellie ambush them. By all accounts, everyone should already be living on the outskirts at this point, as it is clearly the superior way to live. I know most people in the world don't know this, but surely the word would have spread somehow. The adaptation itself confirms that people in the quarantine zones can communicate to the outside world with radio. Simply put, the world doesn't seem that harsh in this version. The infected don't really matter, Ellie's motivation to become more violent doesn't matter, nor does Joel's skill set. Bill isn't a representation of Joel's facade of a survivor, he's a guy who won the apocalypse. A cure for the cordyceps might be a great thing for the world, but it isn't like the people of Jackson actually necessarily need that. You might perceive this as a bad faith argument that the show obviously can't be as violent as the video game because this would turn it into John Wick if the show were replicating those elements from the game, but consider the following. If Ellie's main motivation in the first 3 episodes is that she wants to become more violent to combat the circumstances in which she has grown up in, does the narrative itself present the world as that violence? Is the world building justifying her character motivations in any meaningful way aside from episode 7? The answer is no. No, it doesn't. She might be mistaken in her pursuit of becoming more violent as she didn't know that places like Jackson exist, as doesn't Joel by the way, but then we're building a whole character arc on a fundamentally faulty premise that the show doesn't even address in any way. The world building, or at least the stories that the audience experiences, undercut Ellie's motivation at every turn. I would even go as far as to question why Joel killed innocent people in his past, because by all accounts there's no need for that at all. And as a reminder, this is a character detail that the show itself brings up.
Did you kill innocent people?
But ultimately, what's lost in the adaptation is the balance between a harsh world and Ellie's innocence. That's one of the pillars of the storytelling in The Last of Us, at least in my mind. The giraffe scene lands because Ellie realizes that even though the world is violent, there are fleeting moments of beauty within it. Even though the adaptation does this scene almost verbatim, it doesn't work because the context for the scene is totally different. It's not a moment of fleeting beauty in a harsh, violent world. It's a giraffe. This is the unfortunate kind of video where I realize that I'm not going to win most people over. I do not believe that this adaptation is trash or that Bella Ramsey did an awful job in the role, as the vocal minority would like everyone to believe. But then again, I think there are many problems with this version. Now, if I am to accept that the show's core theme is toxic love, then I can at least understand that it's an interesting broadening of the original narrative's concept. But ultimately, if I'm asked to pick which narrative to experience again, I will always pick the original. Because after all, what is the point of even doing these video game adaptations? To me at least, it is to give access to these amazing narratives that are out of reach for my parents, my sister, or my girlfriend who do not play video games. That's what it's all about for me at least. I'm not mad that they took a chance and expanded on the side characters. In fact, episode 3 is probably the best in the season. But then again, if I give this show to my parents, they will not get The Last of Us that I got. This version of the story ultimately sacrifices the intimate focus that made the game so emotionally compelling. This is not about Joel and Ellie, it's about the world. A version which I find personally far less interesting than its inspiration. Thanks for watching. I'll be covering the second season on the channel, starting with a video about part 2 and how changes could be implemented into the show from that game. If you're interested in that, subscribe to the channel.